So tonight's speaker, Ted, KJ6NON. He has a background in computers and a hobby in electronics. And this makes digital ham radio a supreme joy, he says. He recently found himself with more time on his hands due to the pandemic and started leaning into ham radio, adding wire antennas, solving RFI and noise problems. Has been learning more about digital modes, and one in particular called JS8Call. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago, Dennis, W6X, had organized a kind of a little training session after our Thursday night net for some people to get some hands-on with JS8Call, get it configured and on the air. We kind of got it working, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, Ted shows up and it helps us figure out all the rest of it. And I think, this is neat. We need to hear about this. Get some excitement shared among the club members for this new mode. So with that, Ted, share your screen and take it away.
Very good. Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate it. I wanted to say I really have enjoyed, looks like that's sharing now. I really have enjoyed hearing the Coffee Break Net and just seeing the vibrancy of the local clubs. So that's been very encouraging and very good. So I got three things I want to cover, and I'm going to kind of spend a little time in the middle and towards the end. But basically, why you should be interested, why this is an interesting mode, kind of the problems it solves. We'll go through kind of a basic walkthrough of the interface, so that when you first see that, after you set this up yourselves, you'll kind of feel like you've got something in the bank and you know where you're going. And then in the last part, a little bit about why I'm so interested, and of course that'll be sprinkled all the way through here. So first up, why JS8Call? It's a very interesting weak signal mode that doesn't necessarily mean low power, but it does mean that you can decode things that are quite low on the noise floor. Negative 15 is quite common on a signal to noise report. The signaling is based on FT8. It's actually a derivative of FT8, but that's kind of where the similarities end. So if there's anything you didn't like about FT8, JS8Call doesn't have that, and you should be thankful. QSO communications is kind of the norm. Every mode kind of has its adherence and its use case, and QSOs and actual RAG queues are kind of the expectation. It's not going to be a fast turnaround like FT8. It's a lot closer to how PS831 used to be. And some of the interesting things, it does permit you to do nets. So you can actually transmit and receive to a net or tactical call sign. And I think this would be a very interesting application for events that ham radio operators would do for the community. It also has message routing and storage, similar to how 2-meter packet lets you get away with some things. And then there's a very active community, Facebook and Groups.io, great documentation. It's under active development. And I would encourage you, if you like watching videos on YouTube, do a search for Oscar Hotel 8, Sierra Tango November. Julian has a lot of good things on remote operating, QRP, and of course JS8Call. Very interesting and informative fellow. So I'm going to put up the screen. So there's a lot of pieces to this screen when you look at it. It's not as complicated as some screens, and we'll go through each one of these big blocks here briefly, just so you have a feel for it. So the first one here is the frequency stuff. If you click on the big frequency, you'll get this drop-down menu that lets you set a custom frequency. Those frequencies are already in there. You can just pick one. A couple of important notes. You want to be upper sideband only. That's kind of the norm for most digital modes. The majority of the activity is on 40 meter, especially in the evenings, and there's some moderate activity in 20 meter on the daytimes. So don't get discouraged if you don't see people or if you don't have people responding to you. There's a lot of stations that are kind of in an auto mode, and you can kind of see how your propagation works, but you don't always get a QSO because there's not too many people on here yet, which is why I hope you'll get in. So the next panel here is the band activity panel, and this is kind of on the left side of that screen we showed. It shows real-time reception of everything that's going on in the passband, very similar to other digital modes. The colors kind of tell you whether or not they're talking to you or they're looking for a CQ. And then you can click on these. So if you click on anything here in the band activity panel, you'll immediately select the call sign. And if you double click, it'll actually select the call sign and change your AF frequency to line up with wherever that is in the passband. In the center of the screen, there's the messaging panels, and it's basically the send and receive. This is messages to you. It's messages to a net that you've chosen. It could also be messages that are on the receive, wherever you've set your receive in the passband. So it's very easy to see a lot of things going on if it's directed to you, and it's very easy to kind of listen in on other people's communications. And on the right side, there's the call activity panel. And this is, it's kind of a logbook, if you will, although not a logbook per se, but it's kind of a blotter of what JS8 has heard recently and whether or not they can hear you, the grid, the signal to noise ratio. You can kind of, tune or tweak which fields you want to have displayed. And then the little star there tells you whether or not they can actually hear you. And it actually will also sometimes give you a little telephone iCall if they're calling CQ to you and other things like that. So this is kind of informative. You can actually set the duration of time for the different panels to keep their information. And it lets you click on these calls and then start directing your communications. And then down at the bottom, there's this waterfall panel. And the entire passband is decoded. You can obviously use your filters on your radio to kind of chunk that down a little bit. And then I'd make a brief note on allocations. Between 500 and 1 kilohertz is where heartbeats are. So you want to stay away from that if at all possible. Some of the defaults won't let you get down there, some will. So just be aware of heartbeats down at the bottom. And 1 to 2 kilohertz is for QSOs, and 2.5 and above is okay, but sometimes you'll be in the middle of someone else's activity. So just be aware. Alrighty, a typical QSO. This is from to, so your call sign is always the first. It'll be from, and you'll call CQ and hopefully tell people where you're at, and then you'll get a response, and the response will usually be something like how copy. It would be good if you changed your response, and I'll get into that in a moment. And then you'll just get into usually for a QSO, you're going to exchange signal reports, you're going to exchange names and QTHs, and that's kind of the minimum to say I've had a call or I've had a QSO. And of course, you can rag chew for a long time on the mode. It's really quite great. So a couple of suggestions: do these things once. Add a bracket, SNR bracket, and bracket mygrid4 to your reply message. That lets other people know how well you heard them, and that also lets them know where you are, so they can make a decision about whether they should change the speed of their mode, or if you're maybe just down in the noise way too far. The next thing here, if you see a lot of false decodes, consider lowering the decoder sensitivity to 1 pass. By default, I think it's at 3, and you can get some really odd call signs and you'll wonder what's going on. Just lower the decoder sensitivity and you'll get around that. Now, a couple of gotchas, like FT8, like JS8, you do need to have a good time sync on your machine, so use NTP or some NTP tool for your machine. And there's also a built-in timing control. So if you're remote, you can actually tell JS8, tune the timing off of other people's incoming messages, and that actually works quite well when you're remote or doing QRP in a field. And again, upper sideband only. All right, what do I think is neat? QSOs are typical. I really enjoy talking to folks. Rag chewing is kind of almost expected, although folks are usually nice. So just be aware of that. This is not GS8. I'm sorry, it's not FT8, and it's not trying to be FT8. They're really more oriented towards communication. There's a type ahead, and the send button will show you the length of your transmission, so you can kind of keep track of how much time you're spending. And then contextual transmitted frame detail. If there's a little ellipsis, it means there's a missed frame, and of course the diamond denotes the end of transmission. So you don't need to say things like, K or PSEK or back to you. You can just let the transmission end and you'll automatically get this little diamond on the remote side. There's a beaconing mode, so you can actually send out heartbeats and receive signal reports back. It's very interesting to test propagation and see how your different antennas may face different areas of the country. There's an auto mode where you can actually leave messages for a station. You can relay messages through stations, and very similar to what 2-meter packet can do. And then there's various speeds that are available. So I would suggest use normal, start out in normal all the time, and you'll get very excellent decodes down to about -15 or so with light QSB. Sometimes you'll actually see messages decode lower than that. But it may not be good enough for an actual QSO. So consider changing to the slow mode if the SNR is below -15, and that'll go down to maybe -20 or so. And then consider fast. If the SNR is above -8 and there's very little to no QSB, try fast. It's quite a bit faster and quite a bit more enjoyable. So those are the high points, and that is the presentation.
Okay, does anyone have questions about JS8Call? And we really appreciated you coming on a couple weeks ago after one of our nets on a Thursday evening. And I would like to invite you to do that again with us, maybe after a 2-meter net on a Thursday evening. So anybody out there have any questions for Ted about JS8Call, or how do you get started in it?
Yeah, Ted, a question for me, if you would. Connecting your radio to the computer, just sound card and plug it in. How's that work?
Yeah, you can do. You can actually do it with no radio interface at all. If your radio can do Vox or something along those lines. Of course, you do get better behavior and more predictable behavior if you have a radio interface. But very similar setup to other digital modes. I actually use the exact same equipment that I've used on other digital modes, and I've actually used it for 3 different radios now. Yeah, FT8 it'll work just the same. Yep.
Anybody else questions for Ted? Well, Ted, the pointers that you gave me were, including that signal report and, including other things in your initial reply. And you don't find that in anywhere. And so it's really neat when you kind of jumped on there. And as somebody who uses this mode quite often, I really thought that was invaluable. So maybe if anybody out there, if you would like to jump on there, Ted, would you be open to maybe next week on Thursday after the 2-meter net, jumping on maybe 40 meters, and we could try another, it's really neat because everybody's kind of starting in this together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That would be wonderful. It would really be great to see more folks getting involved. And as I said, this mode is so powerful. It gives you so many capabilities, and it's, you can do quick things. You can do 2-meter packet type things. You can do events. You can do the QSOs. I mean, it is a really great mode. Lots of interesting features, and I'd be happy to see more folks getting involved.